Tuesday afternoon or Thursday. I screwed up my own intro. Thursday afternoon, and that means Mio and MMA. I am your host, Mio, here to break down UFC 268. 280. Wow, I am terrible today. I don't know what's up. We're going back to Fight Island, Abu Dhabi, and we've got a pretty damn stacked card here. I mean, obviously you've got two title fights. Oliveira, Makhachev. You've got Sterling versus Dillashaw. We've got Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley for the Sean O'Malley crowd. We've got Beneil Daruish versus Mateusz Gamrot, which I'm looking forward to a lot. We have potential flyweight contender, potential breath of fresh air, Manon Fiorot versus Caitlin Chikagian, the longtime flyweight kind of gatekeeper to the contention ranks. Bilal Muhammad, Sean Brady's really interesting. Not as much looking forward to Mahmoud Muradov versus Caio Bahayo, but hey, it's still not a bad fight. Volkan Oezdemir versus Nikita Krylov is like the worst type of fight to break down because you're watching footage and just going, this is so damn sloppy. And somehow I miss Zubair Tukhugov and Lucas Almeida on my little cheat sheet for odds here, so I'll have to pull that fight page up. And Abukar Nurmagomedov versus Gadzi Omar Gatsiev, which is a heck of a name. Arm Petrosyan, AJ Dobson, Muhammad Makhachev versus Malcolm Gordon, and Lena Landsberg versus Carol Hossa. Now, obviously, this fight did lose some good fights. Marina Rodriguez and Amanda Lemos were supposed to be on this card. They are not. There was a number of attempts to put Magomed Mustaev on the card. Originally against Jamie Malarkey. That fell apart due to Malarkey injury. And then against Yamato Nishikawa. That fell apart in some kind of weird zone of... what's the word I'm looking for? Contract miasma and so on. And also possibly the fact that there are some suggestions that Nishikawa has to have a fake record because... he made his pro debut when he would have been, I want to say 14. Let's see here, 2016, born in 2002. Yeah, and the fact that he has 30, count them, 30 fights as a 19-year-old. I will say that because of the honest kind of stupidity of regulations elsewhere in the world, that still might be a legit record, but it might not be. And there was, of course, originally an idea of having Hamdi Adel Wahad on the card. I'm actually going to miss that. Adel Wahad is someone who I think actually has a lot of promise. His fight with Dontel Mays really has me on the bandwagon. Like, he has a high level of wrestling. He's 29, which for a heavyweight is super young. And a lot of time to possibly improve. And just a lot of, the prerequisite of heavyweight MMA, which is being a tough bastard. So, shame that fight didn't come together. And on the bright side, I think Shamil Abdurakhimov versus Jailton Almeida being pulled off the card, probably a good thing. Because I think that that was a really predictable fight. Really, really predictable fight. So let's start at the top, work our way down. Charles Oliveira, Islam Makhachev. Oliveira coming in as the underdog on most betting odds that I've seen, although not all. And Makhachev coming in as the favorite. Close betting line, we're talking minus 200 to plus 200 sort of area. So it's pretty close, but people are riding a little bit on Makhachev here. I have to address the sort of odious, toxic nature around this fight. By the way, thanks to someone who pointed out the MMA Twitter has become odious, because that's my new word for the next little bit. That is that... So when I hate on Conor McGregor, for example, no one will concoct that to hating on Irish people. If I'm hating on Aljamain Sterling, no one really concocts that to anything beyond a dislike of Aljamain Sterling. TJ Dillashaw, BJ Penn, whatever. All of these examples of fighters that I have had a rant or two about, beat about their in-cage performance, out-of-cage stuff, whatever the case may be. there's seldom been that link of toxicity that you dislike him because of a racial or religious connotation. And with Makhachev, there definitely kind of is that. Like, I don't dislike Makhachev, but like I'm watching the social media and seeing like, if you dislike Islam Makhachev, you are racist or Islamophobic or whatever. And I think there's an argument that can be said that you just don't really like Makhachev, like any fighter. And as far as the whole title conversation around him goes, I'm in the middle. I'm in the middle because on one hand, you have the Islam Makhachev, greatest fighter to not be champion or whatever, crowd, who believe no one should have gotten this title shot but Makhachev. And then you have the people who will constantly just bring out like a lacking resume, how this should have been something else. But they almost always are like advocating for someone that Charles Oliveira already beat. And like, that's the thing, is that like, is beating Bobby Green, Dan Hooker, Thiago Moises, Davi Ramos, a debuting Arman Tsarukyan, and so on, actually worth a title shot? It probably shouldn't be, but that's not Makhachev's fault. He was booked to fight RDA on 3 separate occasions. Twice RDA pulled out. He was slated to fight Beneil Daruish. Daruish pulled out. So the attempts to make him a better resume have been there and have failed largely due to other people's faults. And realistically, who else are you going to put in this spot? Are you going to ice the lightweight division, one of the most exciting divisions in all of mixed martial arts and all of the UFC, with no champion? Will you develop someone who could fight Charles Oliveira? Because if you look at the other options, Beneil Dariush dodged a fight with Islam Makhachev, does not have an appreciably better resume. Rafael Fiziev, who does have that win over RDA, but that's about it. I don't really know if you could put him in there. And then and then after that, we're talking about like RDA and Gamrot and Tsarukyan and Ismagulov, and somehow Conor McGregor still at number 12. So there is nobody with a better claim to the title shot than Makhachev. If you put Dariush in this spot, I wouldn't complain, but it's not a better case. So anyways, that's my take on that part of it. There's been some interesting ideas, a lot of interesting, like this has been the fight that has dominated social media for like the last 2 months. People asking how this fight's going to go. How does Makhachev being like the best clinch wrestler affect how Charles Oliveira approaches the fight? Which I think honestly is not even really a question. I say this because if we look at Charles Oliveira's fights, they all clearly have the same kind of goals in mind, at least recently. And we are talking about a guy who does not have a particularly functional range game because of eyesight. It's why he, I think, gets lit up so hard at the beginning of a lot of fights, is that he has to tactilely find his range as opposed to having good eyes to pick it up. And as a result, I have no doubt that he's going to fight Makhachev much the same as he would fight anybody else. There may be like specific technical things he tries that are in reference to the specific opponent, but like the core aspects of Charles' game does not change fight to fight to fight to fight, or opponent to opponent. I think it's very much the same kind of approach. Now for Makhachev, it's more interesting because he's facing the most dangerous grappler he's ever fought. Because in MMA, his biggest grappler wins would be Davi Ramos and Thiago Moises. And neither of those guys are anywhere near the chaotic scrambler and venomous grappler that Charles Oliveira is. They may have better aspects in some regards. Ramos, I think, is a much better... I think to a degree, both are actually better defensive grapplers than Charles. But offensively speaking, like this is a completely different card. A completely different level to the game. So does Makhachev, who in both of those fights went very boxing heavy, very striking heavy, very deny the grappling aspects. With Moises, he eventually did go to the ground and finish Moises. But it was only after Moises had repetitively done it and had given up terrible position in the attempted clinch game. It was like a big red light saying, come on in. And he finally did. If he does it against Oliveira is a lot more likely to turn that around and use that even as a bait than Moises. And against Ramos, he also started grappling him very, very late in the third round. But at the same time, that was another example of like Ramos really giving him an obvious opportunity. Like to the point where I think he couldn't say no. I think if you had asked his coaches in the cone of truth before that fight if Islam was going to willingly grapple with either of them, I think the answer would have been no. So that's kind of the weird fundamental question here is, does Islam Makhachev go out there and try to be a ranged kickboxer? Or does he aggressively engage in the grappling with Charles Oliveira? Or if he does engage with the grappling and it's not aggressive, does he just kind of chill there? And is that the right idea? Because I think you can aggressively engage with Charles Oliveira on the ground. It's not an instant death sentence, which a lot of people have tried to make it out to kind of be. He is a guy who was submitted by Ricardo Lamas, was pounded out by Paul Felder, was submitted by Anthony Pettis. And these are older fights, don't get me wrong. These are 5 years ago or more. He's gone undefeated, of course, since 2017. But even if you look at that run, Kevin Lee had success grappling with Charles Oliveira. He couldn't keep it up, and he lost. And even Christos Giagos had a sliver of it. And none of these guys are at the level of Makhachev. Although, I will say this. There's a lot of like treating Makhachev as like just Khabib Nurmagomedov. And that's not true. Both in good and bad ways. I think Islam is a more defensively tuned fighter than Khabib. But he doesn't have the athletic upside. He doesn't have the venom. And he doesn't have the raw aggression, to be honest. Like, Khabib was a mean fighter who wanted to punish you. I don't ever get that same vibe off of Makhachev. So how do I think the fight is going to go? I think that Makhachev can't avoid grappling with Charles for 5 rounds. I think Charles Oliveira is a persistent enough grappling attempter, aggressive enough that he is going to make Makhachev grapple with him. Or he's going to get hurt kind of badly in the clinch. Because Charles is actually pretty nasty in the clinch. Does Makhachev, who does have some bad tendencies, there's a little bit of a give his back game to him. There's a little bit of a sticking his neck out a little too far. A little too vulnerable to submissions, just saying. Hasn't cost him yet. But like I said, he also hasn't faced anyone nearly as nasty as Charles Oliveira. And the more I talk about this, the more I have to really say that I think Charles wins. Is it going to be a dominant win? Is it going to be a comfortable win? No. I don't think there's such a thing for Charles Oliveira against an elite fighter. I think he will at some point get hurt because he almost always does. He almost always gets hurt early. And the problem is that I don't believe Makhachev has that edge of a wild man to actually make it happen. I don't think he's comfortable enough in a chaotic fight to make it happen. But it's not going to surprise me if he does. Like, if you're picking Islam Makhachev, I don't really have a coherent argument for you not to do it. I don't have a solid breakdown of why he can't do this. It's a feeling, an impression I get that in a chaotic fight, Charles being so at home with that now gets a submission. And Islam not being that comfortable. And we've also seen, like, there were a couple of moments where Moises had some offense that I think if you let Charles have, it's a lot worse. So, yeah, like I said, I'm going with Charles. I'm going to stick with that. But there have been various points where I've been on the Makhachev bandwagon for this fight. Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw. Another fight that would be way, way more interesting if Aljo didn't do the Andrew Tate stuff. I'm not going to get terribly deep into that. It's just that if you're a famous person, semi-famous, whatever, and UFC fighters and particularly champions definitely qualifies that, and you take a picture with a person who's famous essentially for being controversial, and that makes it out on social media as it's supposed to, you are going to have a near impossible task trying to distance yourself from that. So I don't really know why Sterling has been trying. Because he's been doing a very poor job of it. Because he's echoing certain aspects of the Tate platform while saying that he disagrees with other aspects, but refusing to get into terribly detail. And again, over social media, be that Twitter, be that Instagram, whatever the case may be, I don't think you can differentiate yourself. I think you would have to go on to a podcast or an interview show of some kind if you actually want to defend yourself. So if you're going to do this, just get ready for the negativity. Either embrace it as a pro wrestling heel or ignore it. Because I don't think anything that Sterling's doing is actually making it better. It's just making it worse. And with Dillashaw, you have the weird thing of he seems to really be embracing the heel persona, actually. He even had the line, "You're going to get beat by a cheater," in the press conference today. So I guess Aljamain needs to take advice from TJ on the outside of the cage of just don't do the "if I offended anyone" apology, which is retarded. Never do that. Never do that. Never word it like that. Just embrace the hate. And onto this fight. I'm going to break this down in two different ways. Way one is if this fight occurred between a prime TJ Dillashaw and a prime Aljamain Sterling. I would favor a prime TJ Dillashaw. Why? Because I think he's a better grappler. Or a better wrestler, pardon me, not necessarily a better grappler. But he's a better wrestler, more creative striker, more varied striker. And I don't have the same questions about cardio that I do and mental toughness that I do with Aljamain Sterling. The problem with that is I have no idea what version of TJ Dillashaw, where we are between prime Dillashaw and completely wasted, faded out Dillashaw. Where are we on that spectrum? I don't know. Because he comes off of the EPO suspension, fights Corey Sandhagen, fight that I thought he lost, and looks kind of crappy, kind of sluggish, really slow. His wrestling doesn't look nearly as impactful. His ability to do anything with that wrestling also looks hyper failed. His cardio is still fine, but not the weapon it used to be when he was on EPO. But how much of that is ring rust and just physical decline, and the leg injury he picked up because he was definitely hobbling, and how much of that is not being on EPO. That's kind of the problem, is that whenever you have a PED situation, there's always a wonderment of okay, how deep did that PED go? And it's kind of there was a conversation about is TJ go to bantamweight, and someone brought up no because of the cheating. Okay, but then is Anderson Silva and John Jones there? I will say that I think TJ has been treated slightly unfairly as far as the doping is concerned, because I think there are other people who may have doped to a similar level that completely get it washed away under the rug. But I have to ask, until I see the old TJ Dillashaw, can I really think it exists? And for Aljamain Sterling, like I said, I have questions. He's had cardio issues. He's had heart issues where he's kind of given up in the fights, like the Petr Yan fight, the first one comes to mind. Not in the sense of the knee, because honestly, I've always said this. If someone's going to knee you horrendously and do something worth getting DQ'd in a title fight, you take the DQ. I don't have a problem with that. I didn't have a problem with it when Diego Sanchez did it against Michel Pereira. I don't have a problem with it anyway. Because you will be given no benefit of doubt if you lose the fight after the foul. But there was a body language to him, a deflatedness, a not fighting things as hard as I thought he should have during the fight. If things start to go against him, does he have what it takes to come back? And that's kind of why I think we'll know in the first round how well this fight has gone. Because, maybe the third round. Because if Dillashaw comes out and instantly starts looking like old Dillashaw and putting Aljamain Sterling behind the 8-ball, I don't think Sterling has the mentality or the skills to come back. I also don't think he has the cardio, because again, while I think Dillashaw's cardio is significantly lower now, it's still 5-round cardio, and I don't know if Aljamain Sterling has that same level of cardio. But if Aljo comes out, gets the ball rolling, and TJ looks like he did in the Sandhagen fight, it's going to be hard to picture him winning. So I am going with Aljamain Sterling by decision. But I am worried. Not as a worry. Worried might not be the right word. I am conflicted because, like I said, if any semblance of prime Dillashaw is still there, I think he can easily win this fight. And it looks like Sterling is the favorite, so I would say a lot of people are with me on this one. Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. The line on this fight is not wide enough. I only found Yan at like minus 315 or so. That's a little insane. Yan is quite possibly the best bantamweight in the world, and Sean O'Malley is not. Like, is there certain levels of concern here that Petr Yan starts slowly? Yes. Is there a certain level of concerns that Sean O'Malley, being a 5'11" bantamweight, can maybe make some of that early start a problem for Petr Yan? Yes. But it's really small. Like the thing that I've found with O'Malley fans is that everything Sean does is some kind of special thing. Everything that Sean does has to be exaggerated. The Chris Moutinho fight is like a perfect example of this, where every Sean O'Malley fan came off touting how tough Chris Moutinho was. Like, oh my, no one has ever put Moutinho away like that. No one. And it ignores the fact that he'd been stopped by UFC vet Tony Gravely and a non-UFC fighter before that, and has been stopped since by Guido Canetti. Like, Chris Moutinho has heart, but not a super durable guy. Sean O'Malley does not have amazing power, and that transferred over to the Pedro Munoz fight, when, again, the O'Malley fandom was like, Sean O'Malley, Munoz felt that power and he had to give up. And it's like, a guy who has fought pretty much the who's who of bantamweight fought Sean O'Malley, felt his power and needed to give up? That's a weird take. It's a weird logical conclusion on that. And the other thing here is that a lot of what makes O'Malley work is making you make the first move. Feinting to draw out a reaction from you. And getting you to commit. And then allowing him to work counterboxing and kind of just like noise at range. Like a lot of empty volume at range. And Yan is not going to bite on those feints. He's going to watch for those feints, find the reads he wants, and then activate his game. And that seems like a nightmare for Sean O'Malley. An absolute nightmare, because you have Yan. He's a better wrestler. He's a better grappler. He's a better striker. And that's no disrespect to O'Malley, who has, I think, actually quite solid boxing. I think he's got good hand speed. I think he throws in combination. I think he has excellent creativity. But when you're talking, again, about maybe the best bantamweight in the world, that's not good enough. Above average is not good enough. Good is not good enough. And also, like, we got to talk about it. How durable are O'Malley's legs? Because, I mean, Petr Yan, not a major leg kicker, but he can kick. And he's also that kind of mean son of a gun that would probably be the kind of guy to be like, I've seen you get stopped with leg kicks and injured seriously by Andre Sukumta to the leg. Let's find out what those legs are made of. Like, I could see this being like Petr Yan lumberjack challenge here. But yeah, I'm going with Yan by TKO. Probably not the first round. Probably the second round. Because he does start slowly. Man, you know, I could even see it being the third round. Just because of how slow he does start. But O'Malley is not ready for this. And I'm frankly surprised the UFC gave him this fight. And apparently pressured him to take the fight too. Beneil Daruish versus Mateusz Gamrot. This was the most surprising betting line on the card, I thought, because Gamrot is entering as a favorite on most betting lines. Not by a lot, mind you. We're talking like minus 150. But I saw as high as minus 195, which is actually a fair favorite. So it's interesting because Gamrot's game is almost entirely locked into being out grappling someone. And that has not been how you beat Beneil Daruish at any stage of his career. Beneil Daruish is a guy who has outgrappled Carlos Diego Ferreira twice. He has outgrappled Thiago Moises. He has outgrappled Rashid Magomedov. Like, he has outgrappled Jim Miller. He has a really, really high pedigree for grappling. And it has historically been like Ramsey Nijem coming out and like just blasting him, and like, okay, Michael Chiesa with the Rene Cachopa, that's what Michael Chiesa does. Edson Barbosa and Alexander Hernandez also overwhelming him in capitalizing on the fact that defensively and in terms of fragility, he's not very, or in terms of durability, he's not very good. Like, Daruish is a guy you can hurt. Daruish is a guy you can hit. Daruish is a guy who ironically seems to have become less slick over time. Like, when he came into the UFC, like, there was a lot of slickness to his striking. And then as time has gone on, he's become like kind of this berserker red mist fighter that is just like, nah, I want blood. Which is an interesting transformation and the opposite of what we usually see. I guess I'm spoiling this. I'm going with Daruish. I think he's the better striker. I don't think Gamrot has the dynamicism or the power or the stinging ability to actually be the guy who hurts Daruish. And I think if you want to grapple with Daruish, that's a bad recipe. I think he's just going to be better. He's an excellent scrambler, excellent top position, surprisingly difficult to out-wrestle. I think if anything, like, I think he out-wrestles Gamrot more likely than Gamrot out-wrestling him. And that's why I'm going with Daruish. Like, I don't know if it's if there's going to be a finish on that, because I want to say Gamrot's never even been finished. I want to say that's the case. Yeah, he's only got the one loss, and it's the Guram Kutaradze fight. But there's not a lot of venom here. Like, yes, he TKO'd Scott Holtzman, and he did hurt Jeremy Stevens. But that's kind of the ghost of Jeremy Stephens, and Holtzman's never really put it together. So I'm going with Daruish, but the mob is going with Gamrot. That's interesting. Caitlin Chukagian versus Manon Fiorot. Fiorot is the favorite by a similar margin to Gamrot. I am not confident that Fiorot wins this fight, but I am picking her. The reason is that she ticks every physical box you want to see in a flyweight contender. Strong, fast, explosive, coordinated, skilled striker, creative striker, coordinated striker, able to attack to the head, the body, the legs, with power, with confidence, with smoothness. But it does have to be said that the biggest win of being Jennifer Maia has not confirmed the hype about Manon Fiorot. Chukagian is an interesting challenge for anybody because she is 5'9", I do believe. She'll have 2 inches in reach. She's very large for the division. She's strong. She's a surprisingly good counter wrestler. Has good timing on her ability to work takedowns. And I just still don't know a lot about Fiorot's ability to handle everything. But I am going to go with Manon Fiorot. I'm going to go her by decision because Chukagian is pretty damn tough. And I'm going to hope that that physicality really does translate into something. And hopefully we have a new someone to possibly go after Shevchenko. I mean, granted, you do have Tyler Santos, who's interesting, but like, if we're really thinking like Alexa Grasso or anything like that is going to challenge Shevchenko, we're wrong. We'll just put it that way. Bilal Muhammad versus Sean Brady. Was minorly surprised that Brady seems to be a consensus favorite, although, I mean, very, very close line. We're talking, on the last line I looked at, minus 140 to plus 115. Like, this is super tough. This is a super close fight. The question, I think, largely is that both of these guys have striking games that largely work as a product of grappling pressure, in the sense that if you look at what Brady does, it's a lot of pretty powerful, pretty explosive, pretty crisp, but pretty predictable striking. And with Muhammad, it's kind of the opposite because like there is actually, I think, a lot of creativity to Bilal Muhammad. He'll throw different kicks. He'll throw flying knees. He'll throw to the body. He likes to pair a lot of things off of his jab. It's a really open decision tree. But like there is nothing physically impressive about it. It's a lot of noise, a lot of volume. That kind of works because you're more worried about his wrestling. And Sean Brady may not be worried about his wrestling. He's a super strong dude. Largely was able to kind of out-hoss Michael Chiesa in the clinch. And like, while there is a strict delineation between Michael Chiesa and Bilal Muhammad as to how good they are and what they're specifically good at, the concept of the game is kind of the same. Use the striking to set up the takedown, get into the clinch, work your game. Now, Muhammad does have more of a shot game than Chiesa does. But the fact that up until the third round, when Brady did gas out after, busting his nose up in round number 1 of the fight, Chiesa was having no success dealing with Brady. And Brady didn't seem at all put off by the pressure. So is he going to be given pause? Is he going to be given hesitation by Muhammad? I don't think so. So outside of the worry about Brady's gas tank, I see this being a very Brady fight. Like, I see this kind of being not the same fight that Bilal Muhammad had with Jeff Neal, because Jeff Neal is a much better striker than Sean Brady. As meat and potatoes headhunter as Jeff Neal is, he is a better striker than Sean Brady. But it was kind of the same thing where, like, the same kind of powerhouse defense by Neal, and Muhammad couldn't get past it. And Brady has less concern about being on the ground with them. So I got Brady by decision. Fight that I'm not super looking forward to is Mahmoud Murdoch versus Kyle Bahayo. You got yourself a striker versus grappler battle here. Bahayo is the grappler. Muradov is a striker. Beneil can strike, I want to make that clear, but like it's a very karate flavor that I'm never really down for. The stance is a little bit wrong. It can be creative and flashy, but it's always a little bit low output, a little bit lacking in structure. And I don't even know really if that really applies here because like Andrew Sanchez had some success against Makhmud Muradov with a style that isn't like is actually notably worse than Beneil's in terms of technical depth, but similar in terms of just like pressure striking. And then, it took to the third round to get the finish there. It was remarkably hard to find Muradov facing like persistent grappling fits, ironically. Because like it was basically just GM3, who he subbed. I thought I would get something out of the Trevor Smith and the Andrew Sanchez fights, but no, they were maddeningly willing to strike with Muradov. We saw Beneil have pretty much a similar fight to this against Armen Petrosyan. Muradov is, I think, a worse striker than Petrosyan, but does hit harder. I think he's a little bit faster too, but his footwork is worse. And that's kind of the thing is like Gerald Meerschaert didn't have a problem getting inside. Andrew Sanchez didn't have a problem getting inside. So I think that Muradov will, because his style tends to break down in longer exchanges, like he'll throw a nice crisp 1, 2, 3, 4 strike combo, and then by the fifth one he's doing like these clumsy overhands that lead to him being crashed right into the clinch. And if he does have a Beneil, I think Beneil takes him down. I think he does that so much that Beneil probably can make that happen a lot. Probably win a reasonably uneventful decision, which is why I wouldn't have booked this fight because, like, I really want to see Muradov against other strikers. Like, that's fantastic. I love watching Makhmud Muradov fight, but I'm like just constantly worried he's just going to get out grappled. And yeah, Beneil should be able to do that. Volkan Oezdemir versus Nikita Krylov. Krylov is the favorite here, which is a bit surprising. Like I said, this is kind of like a frustrating breakdown for me because watching these two guys fight is always a bit of a headache because they always are sloppy and often have to have it beaten in their head that something will actually work before they'll do it. Like a case in point is like I'm picking basically Oezdemir because of fight IQ. Because if you watch Krylov's fights in the last couple of years, it's a lot of him trying to establish wrestling dominance. And it's not like his game needs it, but like it's in his head that he has to wrestle. It's why I picked Paul Craig. It's why Paul Craig beat him. I can't remember if I picked Paul Craig in that fight. I want to say I did, but I can't remember. He needs to grapple. He feels he needs to grapple, I guess, in a nutshell. And I think if you do that with Oezdemir's got a good enough takedown defense game and a good enough counter game that he'll probably slowly, and very sloppily pick him apart. So I'm going with Oezdemir by decision. So another underdog pick. Abubakar Nurmagomedov versus Omar. Pardon me. I thought it was Omar Gadzhiev, but it's Omar Gadzhiev. There we go. I don't trust either of these guys. Like they're kind of the same fundamental fighter, like sort of the standard Dagestani Chechen fighter. On paper, good wrestler, good grappler, serviceable stand-up. I just don't believe in either of them. Like everything I watch of them just leaves me with more and more doubts about how smartly put together their games are. I'm going with Nurmagomedov by decision, but honestly, I don't know. I don't know. It depends on which one of these guys actually comes up with the talent that they are supposed to have. And I skipped the Tukugov versus Lucas Almeida fight. What's the betting odds on this one? Tukugov is the favorite. By the way, in the other one, Nurmagomedov is the favorite, but I think that's just really just name value. That name is, carrying a lot to it. I like Lucas Almeida, I really do, and he's fighting Zubair Tukugov, who I do not like. Mostly because there's a lot of like legal stuff kind of around him, and like he's almost always involved in Khabib Nurmagomedov's like less than savory moments. Feels like kind of like very bully adjacent, and I like watching Almeida fight. He seems like a cool dude, but we don't let that get in our way here. And that's kind of the thing is like Takugov has proved himself to be like actually a pretty good fighter, regardless of what I think about him personally. He's a guy who has gone out there and beaten Ricardo Ramos, beaten Kevin Aguilar, beaten Felipe Nover, beaten Ernest Chavez, beaten Douglas Da Silva, Andrade throughout his career. Done a great job. His only losses are to Hakeem Dawodu via split decision and Hanan Bocano via split decision, mostly because of his low output. And Almeida is definitely a guy who is going to force an output on him. Like he's a high volume striker to a ridiculous level. But he's also very open to getting hit. There's a lot to work with there. And that's why at the end of the day, I'm picking Takugov to win a decision. I think there's also a lot of wrestling there to be handled. I think also the Daniel Zellhuber's completely failed debut in the UFC, I think probably has to make some of us rethink Lucas Almeida a little bit, and maybe think that like beating Mike Trezano is just a function of like Mike Trezano not actually being that good. But we'll find out. Takugov is also kind of frustrating in the sense that just because he's adjacent to the whole visa and Russia issue, and what I mean by that is that every time a Russian fighter gets rejected a visa to fight MMA, kickboxing, boxing, whatever the case may be, whatever combat sport, we tend to broil up this whole political debate about like how the sanctions on Russia are actually just affecting athletes and so on, while ignoring that the fighters who have been getting their visas rejected were getting their visas rejected long before the Ukraine conflict actually started, long before anything was in place. Because if you look at Takugov's history, he has been booked very seldomly in the United States because he has significant visa issues historically. So that's another reason why, just kind of like adjacent to Takugov, that I'm not a big fan, but I do think he'll win this fight. Armen Petrosyan, who we talked about in the Kyle Bahayo fight, is fighting AJ Dobson. Both guys are kind of promising, but like at the same time not trustworthy, because with like Petrosyan, you have a guy who has a solid kickboxing background. Has a solid kickboxing background for MMA. He's actually fairly elusive, fairly good footwork, good counter game, good jab, good volume. Doesn't seem to be paralyzed by the threat of grappling. But at the same time, he probably should be 0-2 in the UFC, because I thought he lost to Gregory Rodriguez, and of course he got more or less dominated by Kyle Bahayo, which is not amazing. And he's also very, very unseasoned, because like he'd even lost his fight in the first round before he got on the Contender Series. He got on the Contender Series with a 4-1 record. So I feel like there's a lot of like work to be done for him. And then for Dodson, you have the exact same problem, only without like any of the technical polish, because Dodson is kind of just a maniac. Very explosive, very strong, very fast. Like has all the check boxes ticked for like a physically dominant middleweight, but also a guy who got into the fight game a little bit late. And I don't know that he doesn't have a particularly deep skill set anywhere. Let's have a look and see what the internet says, but he doesn't feel like a guy who in any way would have a deep skill set. He doesn't fight like it. I got nothing. No wrestling background, no boxing background, no jiu-jitsu. And I don't think he's put it together. And he definitely had not put it together in his debut against Jacob Malkoun. And Malkoun is not a particularly dynamic fighter or a particularly physically gifted one. and he was able to more or less dominate him. And Petrosian's a completely different fighter. Don't get me wrong. Like, he's a striker where Malkoun is predominantly a takedown guy. But Petrosian has that primary skill set comfort without the rounding out. Whereas Dodson, it's just physical blowout. And I think anyone who can fight a decent athlete probably will beat him. And I assume Petrosian has that. So we're going with Armen Petrosian by decision. Muhammad Makhachev is the biggest favorite on this card. I found him as far as minus 920. What the hell? What about that Charles Johnson fight makes you think that it's anywhere that obvious that he's going to beat Malcolm Gordon? Like, I'm picking him. I am picking him. This is not a Malcolm Gordon fanboy. Pick Malcolm Gordon. Because Malcolm Gordon has all kinds of issues with his fragility, or with his durability, with his defense. It's a lot of, I'm tall, I'm long, therefore I have defense. That insulation defense I like to talk about. And he's very pressurable. So, like, I'm picking Makhachev to go out there, pressure, put the wrestling on him, and possibly submit him, possibly ground and pound him out, possibly knock him out. Like, there's a lot of different ways to win, possibly win a decision. I'm picking decision because Makhachev just seemed like real happy with that Charles Johnson fight, and he shouldn't be. And Gordon's threat from bottom, like, Gordon's got a bunch of actually bottom submissions because he's got, long legs and super lanky dude. But it's all against dudes who are just bad. Like, guys that you wonder how he ended up there in the first place. So, like, I'm taking Makhachev. But, oh boy. The hype train on him is still very, very real. And I got off that a fight ago. Lena Landsberg versus Carol Hossa. Going with Carol Hossa. There's not really a lot to talk about here. Landsberg is someone who is now 40 years old. Was not terribly great to begin with. Like, she was a tough clinch girl. Underrated takedown artist. Good cardio. Super tough. Persistent. Mentally hard-nosed. But at the end of the day, yeah, we did just see Carol Hossa lose to Sarah McMahon, who is also in her 40s. But Sarah McMahon is still a physical freak of a wrestler. Like, the problem there is that, like, keeping it up for the whole time and, like, mentally breaking are still there. Like Sarah McMahon probably still is one of the top 10 athletes in the division, despite her age. And I just see Hossa having way too much volume. Fairly creative striker. Good footwork. Has a couple of submission losses to Melissa Gatto and Larissa Pachenko, but they were kind of like very dynamic. That's not how Lena Landsberg works in that regard. She's more of a grinder. And I'm not really sure you can just out-grind Carol Hossa. So Hossa by decision. That brings us to an end of the predictions here. I hope you enjoy UFC 280. Got it right that time. Despite the fact that it is on super early for us in North America. But hey, Europe and the rest of the world has to deal with this all the time. We can do it once in a while. So yeah. I think it'll be a good card. I'm looking forward to these fights all in one way or another. Even if some of them are frustrating to research. And as per usual, you can find all my links below, to the left, to the right, over top, depending on where you are. Spotify, Anchor, Acast, YouTube, and the link tree. Please join my Discord if you have not already. There is an excellent mixed martial arts role-playing game that we do there with a fight simulator where you get to guide yourself through a career as an MMA fighter, as well as going down to fight in the Costa Rica death matches, which is basically MMA mixed with Mortal Kombat, which is awesome. And there's also Slam Ball Simulator, which is basketball mixed with hockey, mixed with trampolines. And finally, we also have Pro Wrestling Simulator. Plus, you can talk about whatever you want there. Never be limited. You'll find a good group of MMA fans there, and I hope you join us. Till then, I'll see you next time. In a couple of days when I do the review of this card. Hopefully, I did well.